Hey, y'all. Welcome to the Collide Kids podcast. I'm your host, Kristen Clark. The Collide Kids podcast is a show for kids and families where we learn together how life and faith collide. I am so happy that you are listening today. Thank you so much for being here, especially if this is your first time. I hope you really enjoy this and you keep coming back for more. Don't forget to listen at the end of every episode. That's where we have the kids only segment where kids just like you get to be on the podcast. Well, like I said before, I am really thankful that you're listening today, and I am curious, where are you listening from? I don't really mean the city and the state, although that is interesting that there's so many people from all over the country and all over the world that are listening to this podcast. I think that's so fun. But I'd love to know where you listen to the Collide Kids podcast. Like, do you enjoy listening in the car with your family? Or do you listen at your house? Do you listen on your iPad in your room? Or do you listen outside when you're playing in the yard? I'd love to know where you listen from. In fact, why don't you tell me right now? We're going to shout it out. Tell me where you're listening from right now. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, I think I heard some of you. No, not really, but that would be fun if I could, wouldn't it? Since podcasts don't work like that and I could not hear what you said, I would love for you to tell your parents to go to my social media. I'm on Facebook and Instagram at the Collide Kids Pod, and send me a picture or a little note letting me know where you and your family like to listen. Wherever you're listening from, I hope that you really enjoyed this show today. We have a special guest. Her name is Heather Avis. She is the founder and chief visionary officer at The Lucky Few, a social awareness brand on a mission to make a more inclusive and loving world with an emphasis on shifting the Down syndrome narrative. She's the author of the New York Times bestselling children's book, Different, A Great Thing to Be, and her new book, which just came out this month, Everyone Belongs. She also runs the Lucky Few's hit Instagram account, and she is the co-host of the podcast by the same name. A former education specialist teaching high school students, Heather is a popular speaker and a mother to 3 adopted children, 2 with Down syndrome. She lives in Southern California with her husband, Josh, and their 3 kids, Truly, August, and Macy. I really think you guys are going to be inspired and encouraged by this conversation with Heather Avis. Heather Avis, thank you so much for being on the Collide Kids podcast today.
Oh, I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is so cool. I've heard your podcast and I've heard you on other interviews as well. So I'm excited to talk to you. And I'm excited for my listeners to hear from you, especially about all the new things you have going on. Before we get into all that, I just would love for you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, so my name's Heather Avis, and I live in Southern California in a little city called Redlands, and it's about an hour away from Los Angeles, if people know where LA is, Hollywood. We don't go there much because I love LA. Hollywood's overrated, but you got to go at once in your life, right?
Right.
And then I have 3 kids. I'm married, and I have a 14-year-old daughter, an 11-year-old daughter, and an 8-year-old son. And I write books, and I do a podcast, and 2 of my kids have Down syndrome. My oldest and my youngest have Down syndrome. So I do a thing called Shifting the Down syndrome narrative, which is just all about helping the world see people with Down syndrome as fully human and celebrating who they are and all of their differences. And so that's a little bit in a nutshell of what I'm doing here in Southern California.
I love that. I love all those things. Okay, I'm excited to talk to you about this, but because this is a podcast for kids,
Yes.
I always like to ask my guests to share a joke. So do you have a joke for us today?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I just have to admit, listener, okay, I have an 11-year-old daughter who is making up jokes nonstop and loves a good joke. And she always says to me, because usually I give her crickets with her new jokes, meaning I don't really respond the way she's hoping, which is with like a big belly laugh. And she always says to me, Mom, we just have very different sense of humor. I said, we do. We sure do, honey. But all that to say, don't be disappointed in me, listeners. My joke game's not super strong, but I've got one from my childhood. Okay. And it's probably an oldie and everyone's like, wah, wah, heard it. But what do you call a fish with no eye?
What do you call a fish with no eye? I don't know.
Fish.
Oh.
You get it?
Yeah, that needs a
Okay.
rim shot right there. The little
You needed
drum
a
thing.
little something more.
Yeah,
It's a
that's
good one,
good.
right?
That's a
It's
good
good.
one. I like that one. I love it.
Okay,
I
there you
love it.
go.
Good. That's a classic. That's what we call a classic, right?
Sometimes you
Um,
need to be reminded of the good ones, right? So
that's right. That's
I
right.
got that, brought that one to you.
Yeah, that's good. I'll use that for sure. Well, first, let's start out. Tell us a little bit about your family, how your family came together, and what makes them so special.
Yeah. So, like I said, I have three kids, and my oldest and youngest have Down syndrome. My middle daughter, her name is Truly, she's my joke lover. She is African American and Guatemalan, and the rest of the family is Caucasian. And all my kids came to me through adoption. And so they all were born in Southern California, near where I live, and they all came home as babies. But that's how our family was brought together is through adoption. So 16 years ago, we started the adoption process, and then our oldest daughter Macy came home.
That's amazing. I love that. Tell us about Down syndrome because there might be some people that are listening that maybe they've heard it before, but they don't know exactly what it is. Can you explain that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. So Down syndrome, we'll do a little science here, okay? But I promise we'll keep it high level. Um, down, everybody is born with two sets of 23 chromosomes. Okay, so we all have 46 chromosomes, matching sets. People with Down syndrome on their 21st chromosome, instead of having two of those, they have a third copy. So they have three copies of their 21st chromosome. So scientifically, people with Down syndrome have 47 chromosomes, an extra 21st chromosome. It's actually called
Wow.
trisomy 21, is the most common form of Down syndrome. The trisomy being three, and then 21, the 21st set. So that's what makes a person with Down syndrome have Down syndrome. My daughter Macy and my son August, every cell in their entire body has an extra 21st chromosome. It makes up every part of who they are. Now, what that can mean is there's some physical characteristics that are true for a lot of people with Down syndrome. So a lot of times people with Down syndrome have an almond-shaped eye, a flatter nose, like a bridge on their nose, um, and usually a little shorter in stature. A lot of people with Down syndrome have something called low muscle tone, and so it makes it so that everything that your muscles are used for, which is just walking and talking and being around, they have to work a little bit harder, and can get tired a little more easily. A lot of times people with Down syndrome are, if you know someone, you might think that they talk different. And that's partly because our tongue, our jaw, our lips, our diaphragm, everything we use to speak is attached to a muscle or is a muscle. And so that low tone can affect speech. A lot of times people with Down syndrome have learning a cognitive delay as well. So the way that their brain functions and works is just going to be a little different. They might need some additional supports. To be able to read and write and do all that stuff. And so the thing about people with Down syndrome is every single person, even though they have a lot of these similar traits and qualities, they're all individual people. And not one person with Down syndrome is exactly like another person with Down syndrome. So what might be true for my daughter is actually not true for my son, even though they do share some similarities because of their syndrome. So that's a little bit high level sciency about
Yeah,
what Down syndrome is.
that's interesting. And I know your family, you guys are big advocates for Down syndrome. Why do you feel like you have to be an advocate for this type of person?
Yeah. So when Macy came home and she was a tiny baby, 3 months old, and I realized, and even in making the decision to say yes to adopting her, that there's a lot of stories and ideas. I call it a narrative written around people with Down syndrome. So if you don't know anyone with Down syndrome, but you know about it, usually the idea is like, oh, I feel so sorry for them for having Down syndrome, or a new parent might get a diagnosis, which means that they've learned about their child will have Down syndrome. And they usually just feel really sad and scared. And so a lot of times, people who don't know anything about Down syndrome society or the people around us have created a story around it, which is really negative. And it's just when then you meet someone with Down syndrome, you get to know them and develop a relationship with them, and you realize, wait a second, first of all, they're just a human like me. They want to know that they're loved and can belong, just like every human wants. And they're amazing, and they have their own unique set of gifts and talents and things to offer a relationship and offer the world. Why is this so scary and bad? I don't understand anymore why that was the idea around it. So the advocacy, being an advocate just means that I've seen something that I see as wrong or an injustice, and I'm going to stand up and say, this is wrong, and let's look at this differently. I think I said earlier about shifting the Down syndrome narrative, that there's this story around Down syndrome that's false. So let's tell the bigger, real, true story about Down syndrome, which is people with Down syndrome are fully human with Down syndrome. They don't have to change or be better or more like people without Down syndrome to be embraced and loved and welcomed in our classrooms and our churches and our parks and our dance studios. And they should be able to be in those spaces just as they are, even if it looks different for them. And that we celebrate those differences instead of try to shy away from them or change them to be more like us.
Right. Yeah, I think that's so good. And I believe kids are a little bit better at this than adults are sometimes. And so kids are so good at making friends and relating with other people. So let's talk a little bit to the kids right now. If they're listening and maybe they've seen someone with Down syndrome or they know someone that has this, how can they be more of a friend to that person, or how could they reach out to that person?
Yeah. I mean, there's two pieces I like to talk about. So there's like, how do we approach it in our hearts, meaning our mindset, our hearts, our idea about a person, and then how do we take a step, like an actual tangible step towards something. So in our hearts, it's just remembering that people with Down syndrome, or really anyone who's different than us, is a full human being, and they are good. And we learn in the Bible that God talks about that he created everybody to be an image bearer, meaning that there's to be a reflection of who God is. People with Down syndrome are a reflection of who God
Right.
is. And so approaching people with Down syndrome with that in mind, like, wow, this person over here, they're different. Maybe they talk different than I do, they act different, and that's okay to feel uncomfortable about different, but to step past that discomfort into curiosity and say, you know what, this person is just like me in that they want to be known and loved and be seen as fully human. So there's that heart piece. And that's a practice, and you have to get there through knowing people who are different than you and choosing to say, I'm going to be intentional in how I see people who are different than me
Mm.
as good. And then you can take a step, and really it's as simple as going up to someone and saying, hi, what's your name? And then being patient with the response, because maybe their verbal skills are different than yours, and maybe they talk with a device and it takes a minute for them to be able to push the button that says their name, or maybe they say it and you don't understand it, and instead of being like, I didn't understand that, I'm just going to walk away, like, oh, okay, saying again, like, hey, I didn't really understand what you said just now, can you tell me again what your name is? That's a real easy first step into a relationship with someone you might see who has Down syndrome or a different kind of disability at your school or at the playground. And then you can take it a step further and invite them to be a part of what you're doing. Invite them to come play chase, invite them to play on the slide at the playground, invite them to, I mean, you can take it further, like, hey, tell your parents about it and say, what if we got ice cream afterwards, after school one day? Um, and continue to reach out and make those relationships happen.
Yeah. Oh, I love those ideas. And I love that you said to ask again, because sometimes I think we feel like we don't want to say the right thing, or we might be nervous that we might hurt their feelings, but it's okay to just be patient, like you said, and keep asking and keep reaching out. That's so good. Um, you've written a book a little bit about this. Can you tell us about your new book that's coming out?
Yeah, I have a new children's book coming out called Everyone Belongs. And Everyone Belongs is about two sisters who decide that they want to put on a show because they love to show off their talents and gifts. And they go to the local park to do it. And kids come up and are interested in what they're doing and wonder if they can be a part of the show. So the two sisters are my kids, Macy and True. And Macy has Down syndrome. And then as they're putting on the show and kids walk up and wonder if they can be a part of it, each character has a different kind of disability. So then the girls have to decide if they're going to open up the show to everybody and how they have to change throughout the plan and how the plans have to shift and change in order to be a show where everyone can truly belong.
I love that. And now you've written books before. So is
Yeah.
this book really different from other books that you have?
So this is my fourth book that's going to be published. My first two are adult nonfiction. My third book was my first children's picture book, and it's called Different, A Great Thing to Be. And it's about a little girl named Macy, who's my daughter, who is different, and how she teaches those around her that different is not bad or scary, but it's actually really great. And to notice, to not ignore our differences, but to notice them and celebrate them and embrace them, our own and the differences in people around us. So that was my first book. It came out last year. And this is, I guess, kind of like the sequel to that one because Macy's still in it and then her sister joins in. Yeah.
That's great. I love that your kids are in the book. Um, and you talk about how in the book, they're changing their plans to include people that may have a different ability than someone else. So why is that? Why was that important in including that in the book?
It's been our experience with my daughter Macy and my son August that when we go to places, so like Macy loves to dance and she's a hip hop dancer. It's her very favorite thing to do. And she's
That's
taken
awesome.
dance. Yeah, she's taken dance classes for years. And in the school system, when they walk into a classroom or even at our church, there's this idea that in order for them to be there, they're going to have to, it's like the phrase is like all the onus is on them, meaning it's up to them to make the changes to fit in. And therefore, it's all the pressures on them. And it's communicating to them who you are is not enough. You need to be more like everybody else in order to be in this space. No one ever really says that out loud, but that's how the spaces are set up. So, like when Macy went to dance, initially she had to shift and bend and flex and make it work for her to be there. And could be really high stress for her. But when everyone else in the room says, oh, wait a second, we want you here. And that means that we're going to have to adjust so that everybody can be here because it takes all of us in order for belonging to happen. It takes everybody adjusting. And then when that happened, then the relationships start to blossom and everyone's having more fun in class. And then the dance recital is more magical because she's allowed to just be who she is instead of having to, really fit into the mold of who everyone else is. Which she's not able to do because she has Down syndrome and that's who she is. So that is part of trying to create space where everyone can belong. That's a big piece of it, is that it takes all of us to make belonging happen.
Mm.
And I think that we don't realize it because it's not real obvious, but I think it's important to know that until everyone belongs, none of us really do, and how we need to make sure that we're noticing those who are around us that might be missing from a situation and saying, okay, what can I do differently? Or our whole group, or, hey, teacher, it seems like this isn't working for this one student. What if we did this instead? And adjust a little bit, and then everyone can participate in an activity.
That's so good. It's like one of my friends always says it's so good that we create spaces where everyone can come to the table. And that's kind of what you're talking about. Like that, I hadn't thought about that some people with disability, they really have to make it so that they can fit into the situation. And for people with differing abilities, that's, we could all contribute to that and then make it work out. So I love that your book includes that. That's such a good message. Let's talk a little bit to the adults for a minute, because I know there's lots of adults listening, parents that are thinking about kids at their school or at their church. And what are some ways that they can help kids create spaces of belonging? Because this is something we kind of need to encourage each other with. So what are some ways we can encourage this type of thing?
Yeah, I think that there's lots of things we can do. And actually, I think one of the really most powerful things we can do is to follow our kids' lead and then be ready to give them tools. Because kids, why I switched over from adult books to kids' books is I think that kids have this ability to approach new situations with curiosity instead of judgment.
Absolutely.
And I don't know when that shifts, like at what age that shifts, like around this grade. But initially you've got like preschool age kids and early elementary, and that there's this curiosity around approaching people who are different or situations who are different, and a more of an openness to being willing to change things around so everyone can participate. So I think as parents, we follow our kids' leads and then not be afraid for things to be awkward, to not be afraid of feeling uncomfortable, and to let our kids know that. So a lot of it really is conversations with your kids at home. Like they ask a question, instead of like shushing them, like being curious and said, yeah, I'm so curious. I actually don't know. I don't know this about this person. I noticed that too, that was really different in the way that they were acting in this situation. And not ever saying this in front of the person with a disability, but at home again, like that made me feel uncomfortable too. You know what? It's okay to feel uncomfortable, but what are we going to do next? Are we going to feel uncomfortable and then shut down? or are we going to feel uncomfortable and step towards relationship and curiosity? Because that's when the discomfort starts to go away, when we know somebody and something. So allowing your kids to ask questions, encouraging them to take note and notice who is missing in a space. Like if you're at church and there's no one with a disability in your kids' class, to bring that up to somebody. You're like, wait, why aren't they here? This is the church. This is where everyone should be. Like we are the body of Christ. This is where all people should be. And what do we need to do to change that? And then encouraging your kids to, again, simply say, hi, what's your name to people, to walk up to people and say, hi, what's your name? My oldest daughter, Macy, it's kind of her thing, is walking up to people like, hi, what's your name? Hi, what's your name? And because she can do it a little aggressive, might be the wrong word. She's just with uninhibited. There's a
Lots
lack
of passion.
passionate about getting to know you. I've had interactions with parents who the kids are like, oh, I wasn't expecting this girl I don't know to walk up to my face and say, hi, what's your name? With language that maybe it didn't sound like I'm used to, so I'm feeling uncomfortable. And I've had parents come alongside their kid and say, oh, she wants to know your name. Why did you tell her your name? Like get down on the level and help foster a conversation. And I've had parents who have like pulled their kid away and like, shh. I've had kids like point at my kids and say, what's wrong with them? Like, why is her tongue out like that? Because again, the low muscle tone in a tongue is a muscle, and sometimes people with Down syndrome, it's called a tongue thrust, where their tongue just kind of sits over their teeth a little bit sometimes. And I've had parents be like, oh, honey, there's nothing wrong with her. She's just different. Why don't we go ask her name? And then I've had parents be like, shh, and pull their kid away. And every time, even when Macy was really little, she's just very aware of that kind of rejection. Like she knows it's happening. And so again, for parents and kids, just to remember that heart piece, and that starts at home with conversations, and that heart piece of seeing all people as good and image bearers of God as they are, and approaching relationships with that in mind, like seeing them as assuming competence. We talk about that, like assuming that they can, assuming goodness when you approach a relationship is such a good starting piece for a tool to get towards that relationship. And then honestly, when I switched over and started writing these children's books, it was as a tool. Like have this book at your home, go online and find all of the books that feature kids with disability in their pages, and read those with your kid, because it's going to bring up so many curiosities. It's going to be like, why does this person have this tube coming out of their neck? Like, what does that mean? And then you can start to like foster those conversations in your home. And then when you see someone out in public, it's like, oh, I know them because they're a character in a book that I love. And it becomes less scary or intimidating. And there's less discomfort because you have this character in a book who you're familiar with.
Yeah, I love that. I think one of my friends, Michelle Reyes, she was on the show, and she talked about how when we're approaching someone and we do feel like it's awkward, or we want to ask questions, we see someone with a disability or someone that's different than us, we want to ask them. She said always to affirm first, like to give a compliment or say something kind first. And I think for me, remembering to do that first helps take away some of the awkwardness, because then we have something to talk about, or then there's something that they don't feel like is pointed out. Just, why are you different than me? Or why do you look or talk that way? You're treating them like you said, they're a human who deserves love and dignity and a compliment every once in a while,
Yeah, I love that. That's so good. I think that I'm like thinking of myself even in public when I want to meet someone new, even if they're not that different from me. And it's like, how do you bridge that? How do you get there? It's like, hey, I love your dress. Where's that from? Yeah, it's such an easy way to take a step towards a relationship. That's great.
Yeah. So adults and kids can use that.
Yes.
Adults are not great at this either.
We are
sometimes
not.
we're more awkward than our kids are, like you said. So we need to practice some of these good habits of affirming and asking questions and being willing to not know and not have all the answers. That's okay. So I think that's important to convey to our kids.
Yeah. Can I add one thing to that? I think too, in the conversations with our kids and with ourselves, like knowing that we're going to mess up. Because when we're doing something we've never done before and we're trying to create a relationship with someone that's very different from us and we don't have that, we're going to say the wrong thing. We're going to be hurtful. It's just going to happen. And so being willing to say, I'm going to make a mistake here. I'm going to do my very best, but a mistake will probably be made. And that's how we learn and grow, is through our mistakes, and then being real quick to apologize. Like that humility piece of saying, I made a mistake. I'm so sorry. how can we move forward together? That's a real important piece too here in developing those
Absolutely.
relationships.
Yeah. And thinking about those families, what are some ways that we can better empathize with families that have disabilities? Because like you said before, we don't want to give just pity for people that
Right.
have that, but we also want to be caring and open. So what are some ways we can empathize better with those families? We'll be right back after this. You know, raising kids in the digital age isn't easy, but Bark Technology makes products that help parents keep their kids safe online and in real life. They have an app, a phone, and a home device that lets families set parental controls on their internet-connected devices. I love the app because it helps us manage screen time and blocks websites and apps we want our kids to avoid. It also sends alerts and gives us the ability to monitor texts and social media and even track your child's location. Visit bark.us to learn more about how you can keep your kids safe online. Use the code COLLIDEKIDS to get 15% off your subscription of the Bark app.
That's a good question, and I'll get asked this, and I wish there was like a checklist. I wish there was do steps A through F, and we're gonna
Yeah.
make this work for everybody. And I feel like I'm just being real repetitive here, but I don't think I can say it enough. It is a work of the heart. In that, how do we view disabled people? How do we view in that specific group or anyone who's different than us? And in the disability space, there's like a couple of narratives that are going around that are pretty common. And one is that fear, like this is I'm so sorry for them. Oh my gosh, this is bad and scary. Or that like, oh, they're so sweet and good. And both of those are what we call like dehumanizing. It doesn't make them fully human. It's just one tiny aspect of who they are. And it's not a full human thing. So really what I hope for as a parent raising kids with disability is that they step into spaces where they are seen as fully human. And that's going to take some undoing of ideas and narratives that we've been, essentially just kind of handed to us without us realizing, just because of the society that we live in and the way that systems are in place. And so just being intentional in those conversations with our kids, recognizing it in ourselves, that's a really important piece in terms of like building up that empathy and what I want as a parent, and then creating opportunities for relationship. I know as a parent raising kids with disabilities, and a lot of my friends who are also, we're really lonely a lot of the time, because when we go into churches and we go into dance classes and we go into schools and we go to the park, there's a lot of we have to be hyper aware of how our kid is fitting in or not. And if everybody in that space was also hyper aware of how my kid is fitting in or not and making sure that their kid is helping to foster belonging, then it wouldn't feel as lonely and isolating and stressful. So any opportunity you have, and again, it's not easy. This is really hard stuff, but any opportunity you have to create a relationship, to step towards somebody in relationship, and to set up a play date, and that's a great step. And then you could go like even higher level. If you are the person who wants to change laws, right? You are that person, then going into your school and saying, hey, I noticed that everyone with a disability is in this classroom in the corner on our campus. Doesn't work for my kid. My kid's not gonna be able to learn and grow and become a better human if they're not around disabled people. So how do we create more inclusive opportunities for all of the kids at the school? If every parent who has a kid at school without a disability was saying that, and not just me, and not just like the 10 of us there who want that for our kids,
Right.
it would be radically changing. So same with the church. And again, all those spaces like, hey, wait a second, how do we do this? And then if that is who you are, even as a kid, like if you are the person who's like, I'm going to start this petition and I'm going to lead this thing, take that step, have a conversation with the principal, like have a conversation with your pastor. Those are some different ways I know it's like you asked about creating empathy there. But that now sounds like go out and do, but
Get them, go get them.
Yeah.
I love it.
Okay, I hope that was helpful. I don't know.
No, that's great.
Helpful.
And I think sometimes we forget that there are those parents there that they also feel isolated. And so, sometimes I think we're trying to give space or whatever, or we don't want to sound like we're pitying them. So we stand back, but really we need to reach in. And that's that's what Christ would have us do anyway. Like that's what God
Right.
wants us to do with anybody. So that's so good. No, thank you for sharing that. I love that. And I know that there's people listening that are advocate type people and they're ready to jump in. So I love the charge you gave us. This was so good. Thank you so much for sharing all this great
Yeah.
information. Before I let you go, we always like to ask our guests to share a memory from when they were a kid. So can you tell us
Okay.
a memory you have?
Yeah. So when I knew about this, one of the first ones that came to mind that felt, it really links into all of this. So when I was in 5th grade, I said, I have a dream of being a children's book author. This is what I want to do. And then there
Wow.
was a writing contest, and I wrote a poem about my sister at the zoo. And it was like a funny thing. And it won. I won the writing contest in 5th grade. And then I went on to, go to 6th grade and all that, and graduate high school. And then I went to college, and I wasn't pursuing being an author. I became an educator. I was a teacher, and which was great. And I loved that job. And then it was really amazing, to last year when my first children's book came out, I was doing some readings in a 5th grade class. And it was a full circle moment of like, wait, I was you when I wanted
Wow.
this. And so just to say like that memory of in 5th grade, like, I want to write, I want to do this so bad. I mean, I always did. I've always been writing creatively. It just wasn't the thing I pursued. So if you
Yeah.
are, however old you are and whatever grade you're in, that like deep longing and desire you have and to do a certain skill or talent, just do that. Write those words, draw the pictures, make the comic books, dance on the stage. That I think that's planted in your heart for a reason.
Yeah. And not everything that we desire has to be our job. I think that's
Hmm.
important too. There's
Yeah,
some things
yeah,
we're going to do that are just fun and they're hard
yeah.
work or they're a lot, but they create, like you said, you were writing creatively for a while and then this happened. So just keep pursuing it. I love that. So good. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Can you tell us a little bit about where to find you and your books and all your podcast stuff?
Yes. So you can go to, if you're on social media, which if you're a child, I hope you're not, but
Right.
that's another episode. But if you are,
Right.
we are at the Lucky Few Official on Instagram. And then I have a podcast called the Lucky Few Podcast. I co-host it with 2 other moms who have kids with Down syndrome, and we talk all about Down syndrome. It's definitely a family-friendly podcast. It's not geared towards kids, but it's family-friendly in that it's good for kids to listen. And we've got 175 episodes. So if anything sparked something and you want to know more, you could go to theluckyfewpodcast.com and find all of the topics. And then just in general, to learn more about me and the books that we've written or that I've written, you can go to heatheravis.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here today. I encourage all of our listeners today to check out your podcast and go check out your books and your new book that's just coming out. It's so exciting. So I hope a lot of people get that and have that, like you said, as a resource for learning more about people with disability. So thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks, listeners, for letting me come along.
Wow, that was so good. I love talking with Heather today and learning more about Down syndrome. One of the things she said today was it takes all of us for belonging to happen. It takes everyone adjusting and making it work so that the relationships and friendships blossom and that where you are is a better place to be. The thing that she said that has really stuck with me is until everyone belongs, none of us really do. That's so good. So we need to make sure we are noticing the people around us. People with disabilities need to be embraced and welcomed just as they are in all kinds of spaces, even if it might look different for them to be there. And I loved her challenge for us to celebrate differences instead of shying away from them or trying to make them more like us. We need to show empathy and love, ask them their name, invite them to be a part of what you're doing. These are easy ways that we can work towards making sure everyone belongs. If you'd like to learn more about Heather Avis, you can go to heatheravis.com or check out her Instagram, The Lucky Few Official, and you can find her new book, Everyone Belongs, wherever books are sold. Well, now it's time for the kids only segment. This is the part of the show where you get to be on the podcast. So here is my friend Addison.
Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Hebrews 13:8.
Thank you, Addison. That was so good. I love that verse. Hey, if you would like to be on the podcast just like Addison and share your favorite Bible verse, or maybe you have a favorite quote, or you have a great joke you want to share, just go to my website, collidekidspodcast.com, and click the tab at the top that says Kids Only, or you can find information about how to send that to me through my social media. I'm on Facebook at the Collide Kids Podcast or on Instagram at Collide Kids Pod. If you'd like to support the podcast, there's a few ways you can do that. First, be sure to subscribe and follow this podcast so that new episodes will automatically load each week into whatever podcast app you're using, and leave a rating and a review. When you do that, it really does help other people find out about the show so they can listen too. You can also share this episode with friends and family and tell them why you like to listen, or you can go by my website and click the link that says support. And anytime you think about it, I always appreciate your prayer support as well. Well, I hope you guys have an amazing week. I can't wait for you guys to hear the episodes we have coming up. We have some great guests, and we're approaching episode 100, which is going to be really special. I can't believe we are almost to 100. That's amazing. Well, in case no one has told you today, I would love to be the first to remind you that God loves you so much. Thanks for listening.
You don't have to go very far looking for bad news because somehow it just finds you. So finding peace in the chaos can be really difficult, but it doesn't have to be because the River mobile app exists. The River is a Christian music radio station dedicated to playing music to help you get through life's toughest moments or life's happiest moments and everywhere in between. And all from artists who love Jesus and are real people just like you. Listening is easy. You can download it wherever you get apps from. Just search 1049 The River or listen online at riverradio.com. And know that The River is proud to partner with the Collide Kids podcast.